Recently, I made a video going over what I think are the best photography settings for the Sony A7CII and the A7CR. In this video, we're going to be going over my preferred video settings that allow you to use this camera to its max potential in the quickest and most seamless way possible. Before we dive in, I would like to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, which is Flexispot. Hang around to learn more about them later in this video. If you haven't seen part 1 going over photography settings, I would recommend going and watching that video first as a prerequisite to this video. It goes over some key important settings that I would recommend everyone changing on this camera. But to keep it short before we jump into the most important video settings, I would highly recommend everyone change the auto power off temperature to high from standard. These cameras can get hot fast, and before I was even finished dialing in all of my settings, I was already getting the heat temperature warning. Doing this is especially important because the last thing you want to happen is for the camera to automatically shut off while you're filming a wedding or some kind of interview. You can reduce the risk of the camera overheating by pulling out the flip screen, as it allows for more heat dissipation. They also make third-party fan accessories that attach to the back of the camera here. It sucks that this is something you have to deal with, but it's one of the compromises of just having such a powerful camera and such a small, compact body. The next thing to do is to go over the different settings for stills and video. I have my ISO and my shutter speed checked because those are probably the two most important settings that you don't want to mess up when you're shooting video. Because regardless of whatever frame rate you are shooting, you want to have your shutter speed be double that of your frame rate. This is commonly referred to as the 180-degree shutter rule. So if you're shooting at 24 FPS, you want your shutter to be set to 1/50th of a second, 30 FPS 1/60th, and 60 FPS 1/125th. This provides you with the cleanest, least jittery looking footage that has a proper amount of motion blur that looks natural. Now, I would be lying to you if I said I never broke this rule. It's extremely important if you're shooting handheld, but if your camera is on a tripod, you can probably get away with shooting 24 FPS with 1/125. I do it all the time in my videos, and I don't think anyone has ever noticed. Now, I do shoot all of my video in log, and I would recommend everyone else doing that as well. The base ISO when shooting in log is 800. If you're not shooting in log, then it doesn't really matter. So don't go below 800, but you can raise your ISO as much as you need to above 800 to get the shot. But I would recommend trying to stay at 800 as much as you possibly can, just so you can get the cleanest image out of your camera. But I would recommend always shooting log because it gives you the best dynamic range and the most flexibility when you are color grading in post. With that, the only thing left in the exposure triangle is your aperture, which is totally dependent on the environment and the subject that you are shooting. Once you have that nailed in, and if your exposure still looks off, like it could be a little overexposed, I would recommend picking up an ND filter. ND filters can get expensive pretty quickly, but I would recommend not cheaping out and buying the cheapest one available, so in the description I will link some ND filters that I recommend. Now, when you are shooting in log, you are supposed to overexpose your footage. A lot of people will tell you that you should expose by about 1.7 to 2 stops over, but I prefer only overexposing by about 1 stop. But that's just my preference, so I would recommend you just play around and figure out what exposure settings you like the most. Now, going over the file formats that I would recommend you shoot in. I suggest using A7CII. It's a compressed H.264 file format that will provide you with good quality footage without the massive file size. Now, the reason I would recommend you shoot on that setting is because the A7CII is an H.265 file that, while the file size is smaller, because it is more compressed, it will be more taxing on your computer to edit, which means you're more likely to have to create proxies for your footage, which no one really likes doing. And the other file format is XAVC-SI4K, which is uncompressed, which is good, but the file size is much larger, so that's why I think XAVC-S is the perfect middle ground. The next thing to do is go to your video settings and make sure all of your frame rates are set to shooting in 10-bit. 10-bit video will give you the most color information in your footage, which will make color grading in post much easier. Just make sure you're changing this setting for each recording frame rate individually. In the past, I've made the mistake of changing it to 10-bit for 24 FPS and expecting it to change to 10-bit for the other frame rates as well, only to realize later when shooting 60 FPS that my footage looked bad and was really difficult to color grade. So do this now and you will thank me later. Now, before we dive into the rest of the video settings for this camera, let's talk about the sponsor of this video, which is Flexispot. Up until recently, I had never used a standing desk. So when Flexispot reached out to me, I was excited because my posture when sitting at a desk for long periods of time is pretty bad. But over the past couple weeks, I've been using the Flexispot E7 Premium Standing Desk, and I think it's safe to say it has changed the way I edit forever. It's actually shockingly easy to put together, and I was amazed by just how sturdy this desk is. I trust this desk with my life. I mean, look, I have myself, my camera, and my computer on this desk, and it's not breaking a sweat. That's pretty cool. The E7 Premium Standing Desk can hold up to 355 pounds. Now, I weigh like 160, but you still get the point. Being able to stand and edit photos and work on videos has been a game changer because before I would get very distracted very easily in the comfort of my chair. Having a standing desk has dramatically improved my workflow, and now I'm way more efficient at my job. It's crazy how something as simple as a standing desk has honestly changed my life. There is a New Year big sale going on over at Flexispot.com. Flexispot provides all kinds of standing desks to meet your demands. If you want a premium standing desk for daily use, you can check their E7 and E7 Pro C frame. If you are on a limited budget, you can check out their E5 model. And you can save even more money by using the exclusive promo code provided in the description. Click the link in the description to Flexispot.com to enjoy the discounts throughout January. Now moving on to how I have my function menu configured. First, I have my picture profiles, which is disabled if you're shooting in log, but it's always nice to have there because going through Sony's menu system can be a pain. Next up is my audio record level, which I typically have set between 10 and 15. Next up is my steady shot settings, which I have currently set to active, because more often than not, if I'm shooting video with this camera, I'm going to be shooting handheld. Now, active stabilization does have about a 1.1 crop, but your footage is going to be much smoother. And if I have the camera on a tripod, I have it set to standard or off. And next to that, I have both my autofocus transition speed and my autofocus subject shift sensitivity. I have both set to 2 because it helps you stay locked onto a subject, and when your autofocus does shift, it looks natural rather than being so quick, which I personally think looks a little jarring. I guess you could say Sony's autofocus is almost actually too good. Next is my zebra display, which if you go down, I have set to 95. I found 95 to be best if you are making sure your highlights are not overexposed. Then I have my APS-C Super 35 mode. I wish I had Super 35 mode on my Sony FX3 because it is extremely convenient, especially if you are using prime lenses and a gimbal. It gives you just a little bit more reach out of your prime lens without having to swap lenses on your gimbal and then rebalance your gimbal. And there is no loss in video quality. Next is my focus area. When shooting video, I like to use zone focus. As long as your subject is relatively in the center of the frame, you won't have to worry about your autofocus randomly shifting to something on the edge of your frame. This is something I started doing in the past year, and it's extremely helpful, especially if you are shooting weddings where there may be a lot of faces in the shot. It allows you to stay focused on the subject that's in the center of the frame. Next is my LUTs. Again, this is important if you're shooting log. The camera includes multiple Rec. 709 LUTs, which are nice, but I like to import my own LUTs from an SD card that will more accurately represent what my footage will look like in post. I'm a big fan of phantom LUTs, and I would highly recommend them if you're shooting video with just about any Sony camera. But sometimes I do like to turn off LUTs if I'm not using a monitor and I'm just using the rear screen. Since it's a smaller screen, sometimes it's easier to see what's exposed and overexposed when the image is flat. Next up is my white balance. Generally, if I'm shooting outside, I will just stick to auto white balance. But if you don't want to use auto white balance, then I would recommend using between 5600 Kelvin and 6000 Kelvin. But when I'm in the studio, personally, I like a little bit of a warmer image, so I will generally shoot at around 7000 Kelvin. Last is my touch operation. Now, I know in my previous video I mentioned I do not like using the touch screen. Touch tracking can be extremely convenient when you need to lock onto a subject, especially at weddings. Touch tracking can be a little tricky in the settings to find, so I will show you guys right where to find that. So if you've been following along and you have all of your camera settings dialed in, I would recommend saving these settings using the camera set memory. This will really speed up your workflow when you're out shooting, and you don't have to worry about accidentally screwing up your settings. So save your 24 FPS 1/50th of a second to 1, and save your 30 FPS 1/60th of a second to 2, and your 60 FPS 1/125th to 3. This is almost like a little cheat code, because before I started using this, I would change my FPS and then forget to change my shutter speed, and my footage would just come out looking terrible. So I would say that's the most important step if you want to use this camera as efficiently as you possibly can. So that's it, and you are ready to go out and start shooting videos. So big thanks to Flexispot for sponsoring this video and providing me with this incredible desk that you will probably see in many videos for many years to come. So thanks for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to help support me, and I hope I can inspire you guys to get out, take more photos, and shoot more videos. Go out and shoot.